Shalom. So this is supposed to be Saint Joan of Arc. Now I know a lot of people think so-called black people are blackwashing history. But we got to remember, recessive genes is a minority in the grand scheme or population of the world. So pale white skin was not in rulership during the ancient days. So as we can see, we have a pale Joan of Arc. Now, was she a so-called white woman or a Caucasian? I believe not. Because if they tampered with Jesus, they tampered with the Hebrews, they tampered with the Egyptians and so forth, especially during the Middle Ages, most of the knights were Moors, so-called black or African people. Okay? And it's in the tapestries and in these books that are not able to, go to these schools because, it'd be a whole nother story. So right here it states, Joan of Arc was described as a short, stocky woman with dark hair, typically cut short in a bob hairstyle. She had dark eyes and a sun-brown complexion. Keyword, sun-brown complexion. Now they state right here, possibly due to her time spent outdoors. No, I don't believe that. Okay, see how they got to add certain stuff or information in here to throw you off? Doesn't make sense, right? Some accounts also mention a red birthmark behind her ear, okay? Also, we have to realize that there was no so-called black and there was no so-called white statuses. The statuses was based on the social hierarchy of certain class, whether it's serf, peasant, royal blood, blue blood, meaning Negro blood, and so forth. Now right here, this one states, while no official portrait of Joan of Arc exists, keyword, no official portrait of Joan of Arc exists, but why she picked it as a so-called white woman? Contemporary accounts and artistic depictions suggest she had a ruddy complexion, keyword, ruddy complexion, dark hair, and dark eyes. She was also described as having a red birthmark behind one of her ears and a short, stocky build. So when you type in ruddy, this is what you get. Ruddy is a term that can refer to a horse's coat of color, a toy, or a horse's name. In the terms of coat of color, ruddy usually describes a horse with reddish brown or reddish yellow coat. And we know this coat of the horse or color or complexion means of the skin or the face, the countenance, right, is of a brown hue, swarthy or tawny, okay, of a medium dark brown. So now we're at the Webster's or American Dictionary of the English Language, Noah Webster 1828. Now we're at the definition of the word brunette. See brown, a woman with a brown or dark complexion. Okay, it's not talking about the hair, it's talking about the skin complexion, the hue. So how did that describe Joan of Arc since there's no actual depiction of her? We all know the whitewashed version of her is a pale woman with red hair, but the real historians know she had a ruddy or brown complexion, meaning she was a woman of color. And then when you look at France during that time period, they were overrun by Negroes or so-called black or African people. The African presence in early Europe, right? Come on.
I was Joan of Arc in my former life.
Now right here we have the definition of swarthy. See, swart. Dark of complexion, black. Okay. Then we have swarthily, blackly. Swarthiness, darkness of complexion. But in all essence, she was described as having a tan or brownish complexion. Okay. So this depiction of her in this photo is inaccurate. She wasn't a pale woman of any sort based on the records of her characteristics and how she was described. So it says right here, what did this female soldier of the 15th century look like? We can only answer that we know very little indeed. We know that she was about 5'2" in height, thickly made, muscular, and very strong. Her eyes were far apart and somewhat prominent. Her hair was black. She was reasonably good looking, but by no means pretty. Her complexion was distinctively dark. Keyword, distinctively dark. Meaning what? She was swarthy. Now I read the book, Nature Knows No Color Line by J.A. Rogers. Right here it states, white people blacken their faces not only for the Morris dance, but because of attraction for dark skin. McRitchie says many British people of fair complexion were accustomed to blacken their faces artificially that they might the better pass for Moors, meaning what? Negro or so-called black people or Africans. To understand this fully, one must divest himself of all notions of the American dogma of color superiority. Moorish blood came into the English royal families. Also, Elizabeth, daughter of Edward IV and mother of Henry VIII, had several Moors in her family, among these Count More and Count Maureen. So right here we have Benjamin Franklin's 1751 essay or address to the nations. And right here it states, the number of purely so-called white people in the world is proportionally very small. All Africa is black or tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, America exclusive of the newcomers, wholly so. And in Europe, keyword Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also, the Saxons only excepted, who with the English make the principal body of so-called white people on the face of the earth. So let that sink in. So all these depictions of Joan of Arc as a so-called white or Caucasian woman is not historically accurate. So right here we have Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, born May 11th, 1752, died January 22nd, 1840, was a German physician, naturalist, physiologist, and anthropologist. He is considered to be the main founder of zoology and anthropology as comparative scientific disciplines. He has been called the founder of racial classifications based upon, the so-called white man or the Caucasians, right? So thank this motherfucker right here. Right here it states, he was one of the first to explore the study of the human being as an aspect of natural history. His teachings and comparative autonomy were applied to his classification of human races. Race just means seat line in biblical terms, of which he claimed there were 5: Caucasian, Mongoloid, Malayan, Ethiopian, and American. Notice you don't see Negro on there. He was a member of what modern historians call the Göttingen School of History. Okay. Now, when you read the book of Amos 9 and 7, the Ethiopians are similar to the Israelites. Hint, hint. Okay. So right here it states, the Caucasian race was historically regarded as a biological taxon, which depending on which of the historical race classification was being used, usually included ancient and modern populations from all or parts of Europe, Western Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa. We shouldn't become those refugees African Americans. Introduced in the 1780s by members of the Göttingen School of History, Johann Blumenbach, whatever his name is. The term denoted one of the 3 purported major races of humankind, those 3 being Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid. Now they want to include Negroid, but it was Ethiopian at first, right? In biological anthropology, Caucasoid has been used as an umbrella term for phenotypically similar groups from these different regions with a focus on skeletal anatomy and especially cranial morphology without regard to skin tone. See, our people can produce various shades from swarthiest to lightest. So when you really think about Joan of Arc and during that time period, was she a so-called pale white woman or considered a part of the quote-unquote white race? I think not. So we see right here, the 18th and 19th centuries, the development, keyword development of scientific racism during this era further solidified the idea of a quote-unquote white race and its perceived superiority. Figures like Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, who categorized humans into 5 categories, okay? Back then, there was no such thing. But they like to whitewash, and it's a psychological warfare on the mind of not supremacy, but rulership. These people have a time to rule.